Yeah. All right, everybody. I think we're going to get things going now. Let everyone take their seats. We got our panelists. Awesome. All right. Well, hello. My name is Steph Chevalier Crockett. Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Hi, everyone. I'm Steph Chevalier Crockett from Councillor Jeff Leiper's office. I'm here today with Heather Perot from College Ward, and we're going to be helping out with this meeting. Thank you all for taking the time to show up tonight, both in person and online. So we're pleased to be involved in tonight's discussion, and we're excited for the many, many discussions to come as we start discussing our new zoning bylaw review process and as it starts to get underway. Before we fully start tonight, I'd like to first offer a land acknowledgement in French and English. So Ottawa is built on the unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. The peoples of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. The City of Ottawa honors the peoples and land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. And the City of Ottawa honors all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples and their valuable past and present contributions to this land. And Ottawa est bâtie sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe. Les peuples de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe vivent sur ce territoire depuis des millénaires. Leur culture et leur présence l'enrichissent et l'enrichissent toujours. La ville d'Ottawa rend hommage au peuple et au territoire de la nation algonquine Anishinaabe. La ville d'Ottawa rend hommage à toutes les Premières Nations, à toutes les Inuits et à toutes les Métis, de même qu'aux précieuses contributions passées et présentes à cette terre. So tonight we're going to be discussing the first draft the new zoning bylaw with some Ottawa experts familiar in the ways in which zoning and city building interact across our fair city. We'll be discussing their thoughts on the new zoning bylaw and teasing apart how residents can make sense of it too. This is our city's first new zoning bylaw in a long time, and much of it is set to change, which I think everyone is probably familiar with in the room, but they may not be. So if you don't know, it's a pretty big occasion. While city staff are not present tonight, the discussion will be an opportunity for our offices to hear your thoughts and make sense of some of our questions with some of Ottawa's experts who are deeply familiar with the many ways in which our zoning bylaw impacts our day-to-day lives. Our agenda tonight will be fairly straightforward. After opening remarks from all three councillors present from Ward 8, Ward 15, and Ward 19, we'll jump straight into a discussion with our four panelists over here who we'll be introducing afterwards. We've got a couple of prompts to help inspire that discussion, but after that, we'll be jumping straight into a Q&A, taking questions from both folks here in the audience and online virtually. So we'd like to remind everyone as well that we're taking questions in the language of your choice. Nous vous rappelons que les questions pourront être posées dans la langue de votre choix. With all that said, I'd like to hand it off to Councillor Laine Johnson for her opening remarks.
And thank you so much. And so many of you are residents from around here, but we do also have, we had over 100 people register online as well. So we should be seeing people from across the city with my fabulous councillor colleagues, Jeff Leiper and Catherine Kitts tonight. You're in very good hands. I'd also like to acknowledge that Councillor Lowe is here having his dinner because he's also keen to get started. So a lot of gratitude to the members of the Planning Committee that are able to attend today. So just to let you know how we're doing this and why we're doing this quickly. So we have 4 people here, you're right, that don't work for the City of Ottawa. That could be great because we're going to talk about what the new zoning bylaw sort of means in terms of a vision, why we're doing it, what we hope to achieve, what positives might come out of it, what might you want to watch for as the consultation progresses. But this is the initial event for what will ultimately be 2 years of consultations and drafts on this zoning bylaw before it's approved in 2026 in its final form. So we will have another event here with Councillor Kavanagh and Councillor Devine and myself with city staff in August. So we'll be able to get into the really nitty-gritty at that time. But today we're hoping just to introduce what this big fat document might mean for us, what it might mean for our neighborhoods, what it might mean for for our kids' neighborhoods and what we'd like to see going forward. So I hope you can enter into the discussion with the spirit of the intention of today, and I'll let Jeff further up what he's hoping to achieve today.
Thanks, Laine. Good evening, everyone. I see a bunch of folks from Kitchissippi. It's good to see you here. I am really interested to hear from our panelists. Over the course of the next year and a half, we're going to have a lot of discussions around whether setbacks should be 2 meters or 3 meters and how much height and where is the transect boundary. A lot of really technical discussion, but I think what's important to do is set the stage with what are we doing with the comprehensive zoning bylaw review. Much of this city zoning is really stuck in the 1960s. One of the reasons why we see contentious development battles is because our zoning has not matched what the official plan has said for really several decades now. And it's time to update our zoning so that it actually matches what the official plan says. The official plan is very different from old official plans. It's well in line with what jurisdictions right across North America are doing with respect to their urban planning. It is much more sensitive to environmental and economic sustainability considerations than previous official plans. It's in line with where the province is telling us to go with their provincial policy statement. And I'm interested tonight not to hear about whether something should be a 1.5 or a 2.3 meter setback from the front property line. I'm interested to hear, what does the newest planning thinking across North America mean for cities and jurisdictions like Ottawa that have been developing in the same way now for decades, with lots of sprawl, maintaining neighborhoods the way they are, and how are we going to do things in a way that is not going to penalize our kids? I won't get on a rant. I'm sorry, I've got the mic. Shouldn't have given me the mic. You and I are all paying way too many taxes today because of planning decisions that were made in the 1960s and 50s. And I think about my kids in 20 years from now, and I don't want to penalize them the way my grandparents and their parents have penalized us. It's important that we change the zoning in this city so that we are economically and environmentally sustainable for the long term. Catherine?
Tough act to follow. Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Kitts. I represent Orleans South Navan, so little ways from here this evening, but I really want to thank my colleagues for including me, because with the addition of me, we have all transects represented, inner urban, outer urban, suburban, and rural. And as we know, all the transects, have different challenges. So I think it's important. And I really want to thank our panelists for being here. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. And I want to thank you for being here, because as Jeff was kind of saying, this is pretty technical stuff. And I think one of the challenges as counselors we've been having as we've been approaching public consultation is, how do we make this accessible and interesting beyond all of the planning jargon? So I think this new zoning bylaw is going to introduce tremendous change to the city. I've lived here my whole life, and I'm not sure people are fully aware of it or ready for it. So I think the more opportunities we can have to engage with this material and hear different perspectives on how our city is growing, I think that that's a fabulous thing. So thank you for being here. And one last thank you is to our staff, because they are the ones who really do all the hard work to put these events on. So thank you to them, both here and online. Alors, merci beaucoup, and I'll turn it back over to Steph.
All right. Well, first off, to those who don't know, we're going to start off with some introductions for our wonderful panelists. So beginning closest to me, we have Rosalind Hill. Rosalind is a registered professional planner and multi-award winning architect. Rosalind has extensive experience and expertise in the regulations and approval process for buildings in Ottawa, and has also worked in Toronto and London, England, working largely on low-rise infill projects. Her firm specializes in missing middle typologies, as well as small apartment and multi-unit residential buildings within existing urban neighborhoods. So please give a warm welcome to Rosalind Hill. Moving on next to Adrian Chute, Director of Construction at CADCO. So Adrian is working for CODCO, and to those of you who might not know, CODCO is a nonprofit real estate developer that is focused on increasing Canada's affordable housing. They've been serving in Ottawa for just about 30 years now. Adrian himself is an experienced builder with a background in multi-residential structures and custom homes. Following 6 years operating Adrian Shute Construction Incorporated, he entered the affordable housing space in 2021, bringing his private sector experience to CODCO. So please also welcome Adrian tonight. And also with Adrian from CODCO and also CCOC, we have Sarah Budden, who is the executive director over at CCOC. Sarah's had a 15-year career in housing that spans public, private, and nonprofit sectors. Sarah also has international planning experience and has worked with the CMHC, acronyms, to create the Housing Supply Challenge program. Sarah leads the CCOC team in their role in supporting affordable housing across Ottawa. So welcome, Sarah. And last but not least, we also have Akash Sinha with us. Akash is currently president of Dharma Developments. He's experienced in navigating regulatory frameworks related to housing. Akash recently worked with Rohit Group to develop creative, community-centered affordable housing right here in College Ward in Bell's Corners. So welcome, Akash. So maybe just to jump right into our prompts and questions for everybody. Maybe for those who don't know, in plain language, how would you describe the zoning bylaw? It's a big question, I know. I'll leave it to you.
I guess I'll start off, and that way you guys can fill in the blanks when I miss everything. So in general terms, what is a zoning bylaw? Or in general terms, a zoning bylaw is the rules and regulations that any builder must follow for the built form. So based on what the zoning is, we understand what kind of housing we can provide, or if it's industrial or it's commercial, whatever the type of built form is or the use is. And then there's a lot of performance standards to how to make sure that that built form is going to adapt to the land and the community that it's in. A lot of nitty-gritty stuff. Or do we provide enough parking? Is there enough windows? Is there enough space between your adjacent properties? Things like that. All of these play a very big factor in the private world that I'm involved with, because based on that, we know how much we can actually build. And how much we can build then goes into telling us what our yield will be, which affects our profits. So in a nutshell, we look very closely at what the zoning bylaws allow us to do, because then that tells us what the value of the land will be, what the kind of construction will be, so that can dictate then what our overall budget will be. So there's more to fill in, so I left it open.
Yeah, all right, cool, got it. Green lights. So I was trying to think of some kind of clever analogy, and I don't know that I nailed it, but I'm gonna try it. So if you can imagine, the official plan is the cookbook, and the zoning bylaw is the individual recipe. So the official plan is like the overarching thing. Maybe you've got a cookbook, it's about, I don't know, Thai food. You're excited about that, you want to give that a go, and you're like, okay, I've got some ideas, I've got the background of it, I've got the sort of principles of Thai food. That's the official plan. And then the zoning bylaw is the recipe. Tells you how much you need, what quantities you need, all of the individual ingredients, and how to put them all together to create that dish.
And maybe what we're going to talk about tonight is how prescriptive do you want that? How do you follow a recipe? And it depends on who you are. Like, if we're going to build on this, not all of us read them all the way through. And I think that's what this entire discussion is really going to be tonight. Well, for the next year and a half.
And I said that, but knowing full well that cooking is a creative challenge, so.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard the zoning bylaw likened to a recipe. That's pretty, pretty amazing. All right, I think that's probably a pretty good way to kind of put a very complicated document into some plain language terms. So maybe to jump into what the draft zoning bylaw is right now, I'd ask all of you sort of what are your biggest takeaways from this new draft we've seen, whether positive or negative? Is there significant moves you would like to draw attention to? It's really pop in with whatever you'd like to kind of start us off with.
All right, well, I'll share two. One is that I appreciate all of the effort that has gone to simplifying. So particularly when you look at the residential aspects of zoning in this new bylaw, they are much simpler and much more easy to understand the differences between different zones and the requirements and expectations in different areas. It's just so much simpler than our existing zoning bylaw. So yay, thank you, those who did the simplifying. And, you know, with a little bit of time, they could take the same strategy and apply it to the main street and commercial zones as well. That would be great. So simple is always better when it comes to regulations. You hear in the news that one of the barriers to housing right now is just the too much regulation. It's too complicated. It's very difficult to understand. If you have cracked the cover at all, you'll get a sense of just how crazy complicated this is. And some of that, I think, is just par for the course. It's a detailed situation, and it's dealing with an existing city. And a city is a complicated place. So making up appropriate rules for how things will grow and change in a city obviously is going to be a bit complicated. But I would challenge the people who are working on it now to see if they could cut it in half. I think it could be actually much simpler. And it's easy for me to say that. It would be a lot harder to achieve that. So I wish them well. And I do hope that they chip away at it. They've made a good start at simplifying. So, you know, I look to more. Yeah, well, so there are some things that as we work together to scrutinize it, I think, we'll find that there are some things that aren't really doing much, you know, like chimney regulations. We don't really have wood-burning fireplaces anymore because we're not allowed, so we don't really need to regulate chimneys. And then I'd have to look at my cheat sheets here. Oh, yeah, there's lots of detail around densities that I think if you deleted it all, you'd have the exact same result. So all of those density caps, I think that the thoughtfulness behind them is great, and there's a value there in us maybe understanding the density results that are possible. But if you deleted those numbers, I think you'd get the exact same result. So in the simple is better attitude, I think it really needs to be picked through very carefully. So there's time for that, and I just look forward to that activity happening. But my other really, really big takeaway here is that they've made some really important changes to the way that we can understand housing together, particularly in infill context. So right now, infill housing is regulated by decades-old strategy for zoning, which produces large, higher-end, custom housing solutions. And that's it. And our neighborhoods are receiving only that kind of infill. They have received only that infill for decades. And it's slowly just resulting in changes to neighborhoods that aren't healthy, that don't welcome diversity, that really kind of zone out possibility and don't allow creative solutions. And we're desperate for housing. Our neighborhoods are getting a little bit stale, I think. It would be great to have opportunity for different sizes of households, for people to age in place, for single-person households to be welcomed on neighborhood streets. Possibilities are one of the things that I see in the residential zoning here. And that's great. And those possibilities are a result of stepping away from all the descriptive words for what housing is or isn't allowed. Single, semi, townhouse, triplex. You won't find those words in here, and I think that's fantastic. Instead, you find a zoning that defines how much building shall we have. And the definition of how much building we shall have is pretty much the same as before, I think. But what's inside the building now is freed up to meet people's needs and to allow for more creative solutions. And I think that that is absolutely essential right now. And so I applaud them for doing that.
Awesome. Well, that starts us off pretty well. So who would like to go next?
Okay. Everyone's shy to press the button. Again, I echo Rosalind's notion that it's a revolutionary way of thinking about zoning. It's really great to see it move past the way that we have seen things been done before, very prescriptive, thou shalt do this and thou shalt do that kind of idea, which can be very confining and can sometimes stifle creativity. So this does allow for a lot more creativity, a lot more opportunity finding new ways to do to provide housing, which is the key here. Now, one of the things that I'd probably offer as a caution is that there's a lot of discussion about the number of units that can be done. And so what that often does for a private developer, a private builder like me, is that it makes me want to maximize my yield. Now, when I maximize my yield, I'm somewhat forced to do that because I can't get financing. If I don't show the right profit margins, if I don't show the right equity, return on equity and things like that, then a bank will say, yeah, it's a beautiful building, but this isn't going to make money for us. We're not going to be protected that our investment's going to return. So we're not sure if we can actually finance this. So for private builders like me, we need to find ways to maximize our yield to get the most number of tenants in there or sales in there if we're going with condominiums. And so that can sometimes restrict the type of units that we're actually offering. And so lately what we see is a lot of one bedroom, a lot of two bedroom units happening, but in these types of buildings, how can we get to that missing middle that is really the key of what we want to do, right? So those young families that have 2 or 3 kids that need that extra support, that need that extra bedroom. Also now with the work from home, you need a little bit more extra space to work. All of those can sometimes yield to a dwelling unit that's a little bit larger than what market rents would allow. And so that becomes a very big challenge for us when we look at these sites, especially with the infill sites. How am I going to be able to provide the variety of housing that is required while still maintaining my bottom line? And I don't mean the bottom line in a greedy sort of developer way. I know we get we get chastised for that a lot. But there are some practicalities that we absolutely must adhere to in order for our business to function. So those are some of the things that will be interesting to see evolve in discussions over the next year and a half.
And maybe I'll jump in and it's really, like I live in this space, I guess being a nonprofit housing developer that, you can't call me a greedy developer, but I have exactly the same problems when it comes to going to the bank that you would, right? And so it's not, those are not unique to market development. And in fact, I think they're felt almost identical. We were just talking about this before. So at the end of the day, I think it's important when we look at this to make sure that we go sort of one of two ways. One of the worst places I think that we could end up is somewhere in the middle with this, right? We're talking about trying to take something and make it a little bit less prescriptive and effectively let the market sort itself out to a certain degree. And not completely, but if we look at something like parking and we remove parking and we say, okay, we're not going to have mandatory parking on any properties that are within a certain region. That's actually great. Trust me, we push for this, we fight for this all the time. As a developer of nonprofit housing, this is good news. But if we don't follow through with it, with this draft bylaw, and we get somewhat prescriptive and then somewhat not prescriptive in there, it's going to be awkward for all of us, just as awkward as we were trying to avoid what Councillor Leiper said, that problem for our children down the road. So I think it's important that we really try to, if we're going this way of built form and we're going to say that this is your building envelope and you may do in here whatever it takes, maybe to Rosalind's point, it's going to be important about things like density that we maybe don't say, but you can only do this much and you can do whatever you want but this. And so just trying to make sure that if we're going with a bit more of a free form, like our discussion tonight, a bit all over the place, we probably are going to want to open up this zoning to be similar, to allow just a little bit more freedom for everything. And maybe I'll throw in one example of something like that. That's probably a challenge for CADCO and some of our clients. A lot of what we build is, at least over the last couple of years, has been supportive housing. And the definition of a residential care facility. What's a residential care facility? Well, that's a great question. It's defined. It's a long definition. We're not going to read it today. But it's something that would come up often in supportive housing. And it can be in conflict with residential zones depending on the situation. And so something like that at this point is actually still here. If we can get rid of that and we can move away from it and say that people living in this facility, they live there full time, are covered and it can work within residential, or it can work in maybe an institutional zone, that kind of freedom would make things easier for us. But if we keep that level of prescriptiveness in it while we move away, I think it adds another challenge.
And I think, but I'm looking at Rosalind here a little bit because she's got the binder. I think there is a large unit provisions in the new zoning bylaw. Testing your specific knowledge right now.
We couldn't find it. That doesn't mean
Okay.
it's not there.
Okay, because I know there's been a discussion about that having a minimum percentage provision for larger units. So I don't have it in front of me. We looked for it, we can't find it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. It's a big document, and there's still a couple of years to go. So, and I think that's a really important, it's a really important point. I'm also really excited about this for, I think, many of the same reasons that Rosalind is. I think what we're seeing in what's emerging here in the first draft is a zoning bylaw that enables more granularity and more creativity. Because yes, it's a complex and interesting and very regulated space to do development, but the constraints can be opportunities and creative parameters as opposed to barriers. And I think that's what we're seeing emerging in this first draft is a shift away from that type-based kind of zoning, which is very prescriptive, sort of use-based and type-based, and really a shift towards form-based. And that's backed up by all of the diagrams and illustrations and the really interactive maps and all of that stuff that you can see as part of this current draft if you go poke around online. And I'm really excited about that because I think it makes it a lot more tangible and usable for folks. I agree there's still more opportunities to simplify, absolutely, but the direction that it's going so far, there's a lot to get excited about in there. And I think it is going to give us ways of visually imagining, visually picturing what that future urban fabric could look like, right? Because zoning bylaws, we don't redo them every year, right? We redo them every couple decades, probably at best. And so we kind of need to put on, I think as Laine was doing a little bit in the intro, and Councillor Leiper to an extent, put on those future hats, right? If we're sitting here 20 years from now and we're looking back and we're looking at the zoning bylaw and we're going did we do it? Did we put a thing in place that enabled us to get where we wanted to go? And I think that's a lens we need to look at this as well. Ottawa's going to have more people. Ottawa's going to be hotter. Ottawa's going to have a fully built out transit system. What's that going to look like? Are we putting in this document the right stuff that's going to enable that future urban fabric to work? And I think from what I've seen so far, it's looking like it's going in the right direction. I think I'm excited about a lot of the pieces of it. I'm excited about the residential provisions. I'm excited to get into the weeds of the way that some of these new things overlap, like main streets and hubs and transit. They're going to make for some really interesting, like edge conditions where these things start to overlap and start to touch at the boundaries of these new zones. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you for some excellent back and forth there, guys. Maybe to kind of jump off sort of what we've been touching on, we're talking about sort of a changing Ottawa and what we're excited about and what's coming sort of through the zoning bylaw that all four of you are excited about. How do you think the zoning bylaw is going to change the Ottawa we know today for better or for worse? And is there anything in there you think maybe people should be paying attention to? Not just that you're maybe excited about, but that might be getting lost in these changes.
I think one of the things that is, you asked for excited, and I don't know if I have excited right now. I think we already did the excited part, so we might have to change it a little bit. We're going to go off script a little bit, but I think one of the cautionary pieces that we're going to really want to watch, and I think Sarah just mentioned it there, if you want to call it like an edge condition at the edge of something, what's existing is not going to become something that suddenly has to be moved out of and knocked down. That's for sure. That's not what the zoning bylaw's job is to say, well, that building there actually doesn't conform to what we're doing today for whatever reason. And there are going to be situations where things that have already been built may not conform to exactly what the new laws are. And so I think that we don't know yet, having done like our high-level reviews, any of us, and the city doesn't know. We don't know who is going to be impacted in a way that it feels like you got the short end of the stick. Right now, you can say, you can look at anybody who's going to go develop and you can say, well, you knew what the rules were and it's going to be there. And so a huge part of this process is going to be starting to identify where those pieces are and trying to stay away from that wherever possible, because we're all still going to be neighbors at the end of it. So I think it's just important that when we look at some of these smaller infill pieces and I think like one of the things that's really exciting but also really scary is about stormwater management. And we're talking about putting stormwater into the zoning bylaw. At a high level, I actually think it's a really great idea to cover stormwater at that point. When you're doing your preliminary concept for a new development and you say, can I make this thing work? To go through the whole thing, to get through the process, and then suddenly find out, oh, actually, we want stormwater on site. If you found that out a little bit later, the sooner you find out about any restrictions that you might have on your property, the better. And the more that you can know whenever you develop in Orleans or Westboro, it's all got to stay on site, and it says it in the document. And actually, there's only 36 different options for building residential, so you can almost memorize what all of them are. That's really exciting. On the flip side of it, it's going to be some of the redevelopments that are going to be a little more challenging, where you might not actually be able to redevelop maybe quite what you had there before, depending on how the new zoning goes. And that's where I think we're going to see some of the pushback. We don't know exactly who it is yet, but there's enough of us sitting here. It's probably one of us.
I think there's a number of areas where really we're not going to see enough change. So I think that the end result of many of these words, which are sort of a simplification and distillation of our existing bylaw, will result in more of the same in a way that we don't want. So I don't actually see in here the potential to meet our housing targets. Certainly not our low-rise housing targets. I think so I think of housing targets as a mix of mid and high rise, so apartment dwellers and low rise dwellers, because there's certainly that division culturally right across Canada. In Ottawa, I think 80% of us live in low rise, somewhere around 80%. And it's just not likely to change, right? We're not going to decide we're going to suddenly house our new people only at hubs and on corridors in higher buildings. There's still going to be an awful lot of demand and need for low-rise housing. And when I look at the zoning for older neighborhoods that have the potential to receive lots of housing, I don't see the business models there to actually make it work. And if developers can't make the business models work, then the houses just don't get built. One of the really big key missing pieces out of those business models are parking. We can fit an awful lot of people in our older neighborhoods using this zoning strategy, but we can't also fit their cars. We need neighborhood parking strategies, and we need our neighborhoods to become more transit served and more walkable. And that's not in here. So if we want to meet our housing targets, something much more dramatic than this needs to happen. So for those of you who are worried about change, don't worry too much. If you're looking for areas of change that would be triggered by this, I would say look to busy streets. The online map is very fun to play with. You get the old zoning bylaw and the new zoning bylaw map side by side, and you can scan around in there and move the line in between. Very fun. So look for the purple on busy streets, and you'll see that there's a significant amount of change on those streets to a different kind of zoning. Whereas in neighborhoods, on your average neighborhood street with, streets and houses, those kinds of areas, I think we're not going to see the change that we desperately actually need. And then, Adrian, I just have to disagree with you on the stormwater. I think that is really an unfortunate piece of this zoning. I believe that stormwater should be managed collectively, and that we shouldn't be dividing up our stormwater management system onto individual especially small lots. On bigger lots, okay, but on small development lots throughout the city, and that's the change to add it to small development lots. It means that hundreds, thousands of individuals like you and me are going to be responsible for our collective stormwater moving forward. I barely even know how to maintain my eaves troughs, right? I think that's not a good idea. And I know that it slows housing and makes housing more expensive. And we need housing to be faster and more affordable. So I think it's time that we're a bit more responsible about our stormwater, deal with it collectively, and get our housing built faster.
I'm glad people disagree with me. I really don't like when people agree with me all the time. And don't worry, it doesn't happen. But I think what I see as a really good thing about it, though, and is that it's an acknowledgement. And we've seen, we saw Calgary. Now that wasn't stormwater, but it looked like a storm the way the water came out of their water main. There's been, Ottawa is not alone in having aging infrastructure. And I think if we're looking at these pieces, we have infrastructure across the city that is approaching end of life, and I don't know, and maybe the councillors can speak to this, how our infrastructure plan is going to manage all of these costs that are associated with it, but probably not perfectly, right? And I don't know if anybody's got pockets or dump trucks or boatloads full of money to deal with that, but if we don't, I mean, I think that this is probably still a more realistic way to do it. And you're right, like maybe it's not better for some of these small info lots. It probably is going to be putting a cost on there. But if the alternative is that, what are we going to say? Well, the storm sewer is at 104% capacity, and that sucks to be you. Come back in 25 years when we get to the plan, or you can help to pay for it yourself. Like I think we're going to get into a situation where, well, at least you know what it is that you have to deal with. And so as a developer of non-market housing, that we get properties that get thrown at us at least once, twice a week, and we do like a preliminary analysis. It's nice for us to be able to know exactly what it's going to take, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's cheaper, but we know exactly what it is going to be that will let us get it built. And so I think that it's probably, again, just maybe more an acknowledgement that the city probably can't pay for all of the upgrades it would take to accommodate everything that this zoning bylaw might allow us to do if we all went ahead and did the things that we were going to do. I mean, yes, development charges, if you want to pay more of those, or taxes, those are good too. There's lots of ways to get money, but we're either going to have to ask for more money somewhere, or we're going to say you have to spend the money yourself. And
how's the money for stormwater coming in this bylaw? I'm not sure what you guys are talking about.
yeah, good question, fair question. So stormwater management, like we're looking at rainwater, say there's a bunch of water. What this is proposing is that you're going to have to keep your own water. If you're changing the amount of water that goes into the city storm sewer, maybe now you have a certain number of liters per day in a regular storm, whatever it's measured at, you're not going to be allowed to exceed that if you develop that, and you're going to have to keep and store and manage that additional stormwater on site. And so what that does is it protects the municipality from having to upgrade sanitary or specifically storm, but where we have combined sewer systems or storm sanitary systems as well. And that makes for a more, it basically prevents the city, it moves the red tape up in the process, right, is what it's doing. Because that tape is still there a lot of the time on some of these other properties where you might get into it and find out actually there's not going to be capacity to support development, and that can pause the development as well. So that's where I see it as something that really front loads that from a feasibility concept. Now, to be fair, I'm in affordable housing. It may be similar for market. We do a whole lot more concepts than we do actual projects. Like a lot more concepts, 20 to 1 kind of range of ones that actually turn into them. So we see anything that pushes it up earlier as a really positive thing. But that's for my business.
Maybe if I can jump in for a second too, if you don't mind. On infrastructure, on stormwater, some very nitty-gritty discussions, but would Sarah or Akash, I'd be interested to hear what you guys might be thinking on this.
About stormwater or about something else?
Anything you'd like to jump in on.
Yeah. So some of the notes that I had written down that were not about stormwater, although it is an interesting discussion, is that, so from the map slider, which if you haven't played with the map slider, like absolutely go do it, it's very cool. With the old and new side by side in visual form, just like there's the old and new text document side by side, excellent. Tiny side tangent, huge kudos to the team that have put this together, because what a mountain of work, not just to create the new document, but to match it up with the existing document in a way that is usable. Like, holy cow, they have done a mountain of work to get this ready and to put it out there in the form that it is. So yeah, really just big thank you to that team. But what was striking me about the sliders and the purple bits, which is the busy streets, is that it seems like the new bylaw is enabling generally more height than what is currently enabled. But the place where I'm curious as to how it's going to shake out is because in the new provisions, there are setbacks required for a budding zone. So like, let's say you've got a purple blob and it's beside a yellow blob. The purple blob is the busy street, the yellow blob is the neighborhood part. Then there's a setback from the yellow part that tells you where you can build higher. And so while on the surface, on a flat map, it might look like the purple section is going to be 50 meters high, but if the setback required from the yellow blob might be 30 meters. And so what you can end up with, and what I think we might see, and I haven't done any kind of detailed analysis, but what I suspect might end up happening is a mismatch between what the zoning bylaw says we can do and what the lot fabric actually allows. So you're going to end up with a lot of purple areas that look like, yes, we can build more density there. And CCSC has a lot of sites that are going to be in those purple blobs. We're going to be like, awesome, we can put a lot more housing in this location. But then when we open the box a little bit more and see what those setbacks say, we're actually going to be stuck with what we've got because the lot fabric is quite granular. And that is the case in the current bylaw in some, especially downtown neighborhoods, where what the zoning bylaw says you can do is a poor fit for what the lot fabric allows you to do, because the lots are really, really small. So you end up having to do lot assembly, putting together a whole bunch of sites so you can build something, even something within the zoning. But I think we might end up seeing that in this new one, with some of those purple blobs that abut the yellow blobs where they're only one lot deep. I suspect it's going to leave us in that mismatch space again.
Yeah, it was pretty fun playing with the mapping and kind of seeing where the density is now and where the density is projected to go. So as an entrepreneur, I'm looking at this and I'm seeing opportunity, which is really great. We work with clients, so we're involved with smaller scale rental portfolios, people who want to invest in their own rental portfolio, have income generating property. This is exciting to see the opportunities that can now be introduced into the urban fabric, where you say, hey, now there's a chance that I have had this property for 20 years. It's reached its life cycle. What can I do with it next? And now I can turn this into something that not only for myself, but future generations can have income off of this. And so that is a very exciting thing to be able to see. And you can see throughout the city that there'll be a lot of opportunities where you can kind of increase the density, provide some interesting built form, and have some income generating properties for yourself and your generations to come after that. I'm also excited to see the way that the homogeneity, if I said that right, of the neighborhoods will start to change a little bit, and you will get a little bit more heterogeneous type of communities. Often you go into Westboro right now and you see like sort of the McMansions of Westboro side by side, but now this will allow a little bit more of a diversity of housing to happen there. In there, though, I would be cautious to make sure that the designs, there isn't a discongruous design between what you see in one lot and then what you might see happening in the adjacent lot there. So those will be some of the challenges that we'll want to work through. The other challenge that I do see is around parking, for sure. I think that when we're trying to encourage families to come, it is hard for a family of 3 or 4 to not have parking. You make your runs to Costco, you get toilet paper, you get diapers, you get lots and lots of bulk purchases. You can't take that on the bus. You might be able to do the car rental thing, but that's not always feasible too, because you got families that are driving their kids to practices, they got to pick up daycare. So to completely exclude cars or to minimize cars may not always work. And one of the other challenges that we have is that as a landlord, a tenant that doesn't have a car is somewhat more of a transient tenant. And so it might be a little bit more concerned about their upkeep. It might cause me to have a little bit more maintenance costs and operation costs for that unit if I can't provide a parking space for that tenant. So that kind of tenant who needs a car, they might not rent from me. So those would be some of the things that we want to also be cautious about, and making sure that we are making sure we are adhering to the needs of the families as well as the 1 and 2 bedroom type of professionals, young professionals or young couples. But there's opportunity there, so that's exciting.
Yeah, and I think maybe, and this is my interpretation, and you never know how these go, but I think that when it comes to that, like it's not intended to be totally prescriptive and say like, there are parking maximums in specific regions that are maybe like right beside transit. I don't believe otherwise, if I'm not mistaken, that there's not going to be a parking maximum on every property. And I believe they're just going to get rid of parking minimums with the draft bylaw. And so again, it's sort of that concept that the market will work itself out. And maybe, you might say, well, actually it doesn't make sense for me to build this thing. Like, sure, I might be able to build within this built form, but I do need a certain amount of parking, so I'm going to make that decision because that's going to be the right investment. And I think that's the way, like in principle, that the draft zoning bylaw is being proposed. I don't know if that's going to work, and I think that's going to be the question for all of us, right? Is are we going to actually see any significant change? Back to your point earlier, Rosalind, with this, because we said there's no minimum parking, but if developments need parking in Ottawa, and we are familiar with our transit system, some of us probably used to get here, maybe a lot of us didn't. But I think, we probably need to not have super high expectations that doing something like removing a minimum parking is going to actually change the amount of parking that's going to get built. So it's not going to change it, again, dramatically when it comes to that one.
Yeah, and I think that's it's another one of these interesting places where the provisions kind of start to overlap, right? The zoning bylaw by itself is not going to save us for housing affordability, but it can definitely like shift the needle in the right direction. It can really, really help. But the one of the challenges that we have in Ottawa when we think about affordability of housing, and we're thinking about transit, and we're thinking about parking, and all of these kinds of mobility and affordability questions, is that often the most affordable neighborhoods to live in are the ones that are least well served by transit. So layer that into new parking provisions and parking requirements and maxes and mins, and however it's written, the fact remains that if we're trying to build stuff affordably, that are family-sized units, which is often where the demand is, at least tipping the balance more that way and away from smaller units, then we have to think about parking. And so while on the surface you might be like, aha, the nonprofit developer, the nonprofit housing provider, they're going to build it, they're not going to build the parking because maybe their tenants don't need parking, or maybe it's going to be cheaper to build if we don't have to build underground parking, and that may be so, but a lot of those neighborhoods that are more affordable to live in, and by extension kind of more affordable for us to develop in, are the least well served by transit, but folks still need to get around. And so that particular complicated knot is not something that the zoning bylaw by itself can solve, but that's where we layer in with transportation master planning and longer term vision for walkable neighborhoods, for things that are connected, for integrating, and this is where the zoning bylaw again starts to help, for integrating mixed use into neighborhoods that were formerly a lot more homogenous. So allowing a little bit more creativity in terms of use and not just in terms of form, I mean, also in terms of form, but allowing a more holistic mix of uses that lets those neighborhoods become more livable over time.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Maybe sort of touching on, you guys have sort of gotten on the question of affordability, affordable housing. This is a question we've gotten even before this meeting. We're seeing some questions come in, and it's even in one of the prompts. So maybe that's kind of, I have a targeted question for you guys. The province has kind of changed implementation of inclusionary zoning policies. It's sort of made very clear affordable housing sort of stipulations a difficult task, but a frequent question is, how can the city tackle the matter of affordable housing through its zoning bylaw? So how do you see this draft bylaw as a tool to help facilitate the construction of more affordable housing? No.
I don't think that the zoning bylaws are what will allow for affordable housing, plain and simple. It needs to be a lot more of a systemic approach to that. Like, development charges are a huge concern when trying to provide affordable housing. We talked about this earlier before we started. Like, if I as a private builder have to spend $22,000, $23,000 for a 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom unit as a surcharge, it makes it very hard for me to make that unit an affordable housing unit. It's just plain and simple. So right off the bat, that is going to be a big problem. So I don't think that that is something that the zoning bylaws can tackle. And then I had another great thought that just slipped my mind related to affordability. Oh, yes, of course. The other thing that we need to address to make things more affordable is we got to be able to get things approved faster. And I think Rosalind touched on this earlier too. If I have to carry my cost for owning the land while it sluggishly gets through the approval process, and Jeff, I know you and I have talked about this many times before too, that is a big factor in trying to find ways to make units cost less. My interest costs go up. I'm much more subject to the risk of material costs going up. All of these enter into, like, really can't find a way to make those that much cheaper, if you will, without sacrificing quality, which is something we certainly don't want to do. So it's not really a zoning issue. It really is a more systemic issue of looking at how the city generates income and where it has some leeway to provide some relief, and then what can it do to facilitate faster approval so I can get my building permit faster, so I can get these units to market faster.
Sorry. Yeah. I promise we'll take your question.
Very quickly. If you stop that and let the staff deal with the standard approval process, then it wouldn't take so long.
That is a hope. That is a hope, and I think that is what the intention of this is, but we'll see where that comes in. I don't want to harp on stormwater, but very quickly, that was something that caused me concern as well too. If you start to marry in some other requirements along the way, when I'm working with clients or when I'm building a small 6-plex, 8-plex, the engineering requirements are what they are. When you start to marry in some of these other requirements that will take a little bit longer to evaluate, a little bit longer to get feedback on, those can cause a delay as well too. So I agree with you that we want it to move faster, but we'll have to make sure that the steps that are being implemented actually allow it to move faster.
Just to speak to the speed of approvals right now, our existing zoning bylaw is so complex that I'm not able to ever assure my clients anymore that that I have designed for them something that is zoning compliant. And I've been working in this field for a couple of decades, so you'd think I'd be able to figure this out, but the bylaw is so complex now. And once a permit is submitted, the bylaw is interpreted and can be interpreted differently because it's so complex. So there's no certainty about preparing drawings and submitting them and knowing that they're compliant. This new bylaw is our opportunity to really change gears on that front, to get something, again, just to harp on simple, to get something that's simple enough that we won't all interpret it differently, that it has a relatively clear interpretation, so that then it's actually possible to move ahead with something that's zoning compliant in an efficient way and to get it approved efficiently. There's a ways to go. I wouldn't want to be too judgy on that front yet, because they only just started. They've got lots of tidying and coordinating to do, but I hope that we can look forward in the end to a document that really is very tight and can keep it simple so that we can design and be compliant.
All right, I'm going to talk about affordability now. Buckle up, this is my favorite thing to do. And I will try not to do the deepest of nerdy deep dives, which I sometimes do. So the zoning bylaw by itself is not going to deliver affordability. Like, not in the people are going to pay 30% of their income for housing sense. And I'm going to try not to also define it by a thing that it's not, because that also bothers me. But like, the zoning bylaw is a tool for building. And one of the things that we do, one of the ways out of the housing crisis, is to build more stuff. We just need to build more stuff, and we need all the solutions that we can possibly lay hands on and funding on and tools on and capacity on. We need all the brains we can possibly muster working on this. And that's the way out of it, right? The zoning bylaw is a tool for building, and it is a tool that can hopefully enable us to build a lot more units of all different types, of all different sizes, of all different configurations all across the city. But the thing that, and there is an element here of what are we talking about when we talk about affordability? Because when we talk about affordable units, it's absolutely legit to talk about that in a private development sense, right? They need to be affordable to build, by which we mean they need to be viable. The project needs to pencil out. The project just needs to work. Otherwise, we don't build anything. And so that affordability dimension, stuff that costs less to build, yeah, the zoning bylaw can make some moves towards that through speeding things up, through simplifying, through clarifying, through, making those expectations more clear for everyone. But the thing that delivers like deeply affordable, like subsidized, deeply affordable units that are like under $1,000 for a 1-bed, under $2,000 for a 3-bed, like those levels of rents, the things that deliver that is way beyond the zoning bylaw. It's way beyond the City of Ottawa, frankly. It's provincial funding, it's federal funding, it's grant funding, it's capital investment, it's like long-term amortizations. Like nonprofit housing providers are in this for the long haul. And we're trying to protect housing outside market forces, and that is not a thing that the zoning bylaw is ever going to deliver for us. It's going to help us build more stuff, but it should help everyone build more stuff. And I hope that that's the direction that we're going. Like, can we make it easier? Can we make it a little faster? Can we make it a little clearer? Because all of those things help everyone who's trying to build more stuff. So I think that's when we're talking about how is the zoning bylaw going to deliver affordable housing, I think you got to ask yourself, what do you mean by affordable? Do you mean projects that are viable, that are predictable, that are going to be delivered in a reasonable period of time? Yeah, that's absolutely a thing that is affordable and a thing the zoning bylaw can help with. If you're asking yourself, is the zoning bylaw going to deliver deeply affordable units that cost under 30% of my income, and my income is $42,000 a year, that's not a thing the zoning bylaw is going to do on its own. That's a thing that nonprofit providers and non-market providers actually need a ton of help with to get those projects to work. Because what we're building as a nonprofit housing provider, we pay the same for materials, we pay the same for consultants, we pay the same for architects and planners and land as anybody else. And some of that stuff is like a little bit within the control of the City of Ottawa and a little bit touches the zoning bylaw, but not even close to all of it. So I think, take a layer of what am I asking when I'm asking if the zoning bylaw can deliver affordability, because it's a way bigger question under the surface. And I think, you said it off the top, like this is a complex space, and it really is. And I don't like to hide between, oh, it's complicated, it's complex, it's going to be hard to understand, because I don't think that's necessarily true. But in this particular case, there are a lot of things playing into it, and it's worth taking the time to go a couple levels deeper and ask yourself, what do I mean when I'm wondering if this is going to deliver this thing? Who's it going to deliver it for? And in what places is it going to deliver it? And is it going to do it for the next 15 years? I don't have those answers, but I think these are the really good questions to be asking ourselves when we're engaging with this, because we are going to have, hopefully, more than 10 years to talk about, is that 1.3 meter setback or that 2 meter setback, like, is that the thing? Because if we're having those debates, then we did it right, because we got the big moves, well, maybe not, but like, if we can get the big moves right, then we're going to spend less time in the minutia. And so that's, like, if you're delving into this, there's such a long comment period open. I promise I'm going to stop talking in a second. But like, there's such a long comment period for this. We have lots of time. We're at the beginning. This is like the first cut. There is so much more input to be had, so many more opportunities to get involved. And there are so many pieces of this that still need input from lots of folks. So please do that. Because the more voices we get involved in it, and the more brains we have working on this thing, the better the output's going to be. So yeah, I've lost my train of thought a little bit, so I'm going to stop now. Thank you.
And maybe I'll jump in here and help. I love the excitement over explaining affordable housing and the zoning bylaw, and maybe this is a good time to kind of jump into the Q&A portion of the meeting. So we're going to be taking questions both in person. We're also going to be taking questions online. I'm just going to remind everyone that we'll take questions in the language of your choice if you're here in person and also online. So nous vous rappelons que les questions pourront être posées dans la langue de votre choix. So I'm going to start with an online question. Everyone in the crowd, I'm just going to come on over, put your hand up, and I'll come to you with the microphone, and you can, you'll be able to go after. So for our first question from the chat, a 15-minute neighborhood requires retail, parks, daycare, schools, etc., all within a 15-minute walk. Zoning can/should deal with parks, schools, etc. How can zoning ensure the required mix of retail, including grocery stores, in all neighborhoods, including in urban and interurban neighborhoods?
Well, it can't. but it can get us an awful lot of the way there. And I would suggest that we all push our zoning team to make some pretty bold changes in order to get to that place. It is envisioned in our official plan, but it takes a little bit of courage to get there, because as our city grows, there's the potential for more commercial facilities, more shops. More people means more shops. And if we're looking for shops in neighborhoods to make them walkable, well, then that means when we have more people and we need more shops, we want those shops to very specifically be in our neighborhoods that are transitioning to become walkable. What kinds of shops do shop owners prefer to build? The big ones with the parking lots are more profitable. So as a community, we can decide where we would like our shops to go. And this kind of represents a decision to continue the way we are now, rather than saying, actually, we've got lots of those big shops. We're good now, and we're going to shift. So I think that that's a challenge that we really need to take on as a city. But this document suggests that we're not prepared to do that.
If no one else will jump in, I'll pass it on to our in-person question.
Hi, thank you. Thank you all for coming. Your comments are so interesting. And I think you guys have touched on a little bit about this before, and that is the family-sized units, your 3-bedroom units. And I've heard this for many, many years, and that is people, for example, in Centertown say they'd like to stay there, but nobody builds, you know, they're having kids and nobody builds a family-sized unit. But I also hear from developers with the land costs and supply costs, when we build a family-sized unit, it's too expensive for people to buy it. So whether it's the comprehensive zoning bylaw or any ideas that you might have, like how do we get past that? And I'm just wondering, just any thoughts you might have on that. Thank you.
Your traditional family-sized units are always further and further away from the city. You really don't get a lot of family-sized units in the core unless you're really willing to pay that extra premium for the high land costs that allow the size of that kind of building to exist. So if you want family-sized units to be in the core, you have to increase the density, plain and simple, but then that has a big impact on the costs that the developers have to incur. So, for example, if I want to build a one-bedroom unit, I'm paying approximately $22,000 per unit as a surcharge. If I want to build a 3-bedroom unit, I'm paying around $35,000 per unit. So I'm actually penalized to build a more family-friendly building. So first and foremost, we just need to completely rethink of what kind of efficiency do we really want out of this? Why are those development charges going to be so exorbitant in areas where we are actually being more efficient with the land, being more efficient with the services, being more efficient with transportation, and yet we're still imposing that level of surcharge on that. So that is going to be one of the main areas where we look at that we need to change. You go to other communities, they don't have that level of surcharge for units. And so that's why Calgary is more affordable than Ottawa for those kind of units. The only other way to provide that kind of housing is to expand out into the rural areas now. There's a reason you see people moving to Kemptville, moving to Arnprior, moving to Carleton Place. Land costs are cheaper there. Development costs are cheaper there. Taxes are cheaper there. That's where people are going to go. So I don't know off the top of my head how zoning can help achieve that. It's going to be a little bit more of a systemic issue to look at, but you're not going to get it just from zoning.
And maybe just a quick build on that. Like one of the risks, right, as we do that, and we, as a group that builds a lot of 3-bedroom units that are affordable, there's a reason that market developers are not building those 3-bedroom units, and that's because the money wasn't there, right? The banks weren't supporting that necessarily, or if the project doesn't go ahead as a result, it might be worse than if it would have gone ahead and it was all 1-bedrooms and 2-bedrooms, right? So if we need more development, if we need more stuff, as Sarah put it beautifully and bluntly, we just need more stuff, then we need to be careful with, again, how prescriptive this gets. Because if we did say, we want 25% of units to be 3 and 4 bedrooms, if a developer has that restriction now on a property and they just decide, well, it doesn't work anymore, I'm not going to do it, then we get ourselves actually into some trouble for trying to help. So we do need to be cautious about how we do that, because being too prescriptive could prevent some of those developments with the intention of helping.
I actually think one of the ways that this could touch the zoning bylaw is potentially by enabling more, and I'm riffing here without having done a detailed deep dive of the new zoning bylaw, but where it makes sense to do ground-oriented units, like ground-oriented towns at grade, even if that's maybe along one of those slightly busier streets, that might be a space where it gives you an interesting built form and you can still do a podium above. We've got a couple of developments like that in our portfolio already. They work really well. They make good communities. And so, to the extent that that's something that the zoning bylaw can enforce, I don't know, but to the extent that it's something that it could enable, I think that's definitely a thing that could help. It won't compel people to build them if they don't work financially, but enabling it through the form and enabling it through like what can happen at grade in some of those mixed use areas could be a way of getting a little bit more flexibility and creativity in there.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah. Recognizing we've got about 20 minutes probably about left, we're going to jump to an online question and then we're going to the in-person question over here. Maybe just to make sort of use of the time, I'll try and pose the question to one person. Hopefully I choose the right person in our questions. So we've got a question that asks, does zoning require green parks or spaces? Rosalind, I'll put it to you, or Akash, if one of you feels especially enthusiastic.
In a nutshell, it's not the parks are dictated by more of a secondary plan or a comprehensive plan about the city. Like whenever a developer goes into raw land and decides, okay, what kind of streetscape we're going to have here, is at that time, depending on the size of the land, that the city staff will say, okay, here's what we're allocating for parkland, here's what we're allocating for schools, and then here's what we're allocating for residential units. So it's not something that the zoning bylaw allows for, but it's these secondary plans and other sort of regulatory documents that the city does that allows for those kinds of functions to exist in a city. So hope that answers the question.
Now we'll go to an in-person question.
Thank you. I've, not to brag, but I just want to say that I've been writing on urban design and architecture for 35 years and have visited Helsinki, Copenhagen, Ljubljana, Amsterdam, cities that, quite frankly, are considerably more successful in the way they've developed. None of them, particularly my favorite, as everybody knows who knows me, Helsinki, but Copenhagen does not require 50-story towers to build successful cities. And the issue or the comment was made that where are we going to be in 20 years? And I don't think that the zoning, which I think is probably the least important thing that we should be dealing with right now. There are so many more issues of urban design, transportation, et cetera, that is more important than zoning. Zoning should be at the end where we say, all right, this is the city that we want, and therefore this is the zoning that we need. And the reason I don't think we'll see any change, there were 2 points that I wanted to make. One is, as I pointed out in my earlier interjection, I live in Hittenberg, which has had no planning. Yes, there is zoning and there is planning, but if you look down Wellington, all the towers and the buildings there, all of them have been built outside of the zoning. So it went to the planning department. In most cases, since around 2004, we would get a yes from the planning department, and often yes, sometimes no from council, and then it would go to the OMB and then the Ontario Land Tribunal, and they would say when how high as they jumped up in the air to approve the project. So it was made clear to Jeff's committee by one person who had worked in the planning department that you don't give us developers what we want. We're just going to go back to the Ontario Land Tribunal, and they'll give it to us as they have done. So how can we actually have effective zoning, all right, and it's going to be increased zoning, even though we have enough within the current zoning, enough approved units already to probably build double the target that the province has set for us over the 10 years without any increase in zoning at all. So how are we going to get that when we have this problem of just being overturned and planning departments not being able to plan? And secondly, I would use the case of City Center. 3 decades ago, it was massively upzoned. Massively upzoned. Great value uplift for the owner. The city built a magnificent transit system when it works around that site. Great value uplift. So the owner, nothing illegal about it, but the owner sat there and the value of the property has gone up and up and up. How many residential units have been built in that upzoned site in the last 30 years? The answer is 0. So what have we done? The site next to it, we've now approved 50 stories. So of course, I'm sure that the city center people, when they come back, are going to say, if Trinity can have 50 stories, we should have 50 stories. And while my lifespan is getting quite a bit shorter now as I age, I'll never see those buildings built. So 20 years from now, I don't think we'll see any of those buildings built. So what is the zoning going to do other than give value uplift and greater financialization to the development industry?
A big question, and I hate to put it to just one person, but I'll try and sort of, maybe if 2 of you would like to try and take a stab, the future of zoning.
That's a theoretical question that I'm not sure I have an answer to. That is a big question. As the demand increases in Ottawa, and we know the demand is going to continue to increase and continue to increase, you're right when you go back to what kind of city do we want. The challenge that I've seen Ottawa often face is that it gets kind of stuck in what it thinks it wants and what it actually allows it to happen. So when you say that, oh yeah, you know, in Hintonburg you saw piecemeal zoning happen, that's because at some point people wanted a more active Wellington Street. They wanted some animation on it. They wanted the coffee shops to go through. They wanted these things to go through. And so that's why until you get a population there, you're not going to be able to achieve those kinds of uses there. Earlier when the question was asked about a 15-minute city and what can we do to encourage walkability, Rosalind pointed out that it's the big stores that have the big parking lots that are the most profitable. Your local mom and pop shop isn't really that profitable unless you get enough people in that areas. So the zoning is just a small aspect of it. When you look at something like City Centre, it continues to make money as it does right now. They did do a little bit of money spending it into retrofitting the existing tall building that's there right now, and I think that's been doing rather well as far as office space goes and uses like that. So as long as that continues to happen, it's going to remain like that. But as the population increases, these places will feel like they can contribute to the housing requirements. And then that's when I guess the goal is that's when the dam will burst and we'll be able to see that kind of housing exist. Whether it'll be 50 units, 50-story units, I don't know if that'll be appropriate in that place, but I guess we'll see.
Sorry about that. There's always got to be a technical problem. Thanks, Akash. Maybe just because we only have about 3 more questions, I'll just sort of stop us there, realizing it is a very large question. If I can sort of ask the next question that we got online, and then we'll go to 2 in-person questions. Adrian, someone asks sort of, where in the zoning bylaw is the evolving overlay sort of defined and explained, and you know, how would you do that, and how would you sort of parse through that? Sort of a larger question, a more technical question, I realize.
Yeah, I could make up a page number if that would help everybody. I don't know is an honest answer. I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. I think we have actually a couple planners here, so I might try to deflect that to a planner. I am a carpenter by training, and so when it comes to the nitty-gritty, I would probably give you an answer that maybe isn't how you actually would find it. So I don't know if Sarah or if Rosalind, you have a thought on this. that you want to jump in with, or I can talk and we can all just listen.
Okay, the intent of the overlay, intent questions are more questions to do with the official plan. So the official plan is the document that explains what's intended for neighborhoods, what's intended for one overlay versus another overlay. And the zoning bylaw is sort of playing out that intent. So I would direct you to some of the explanatory maps that are online. They're not technically part of the bylaw, but I found them quite useful in kind of understanding what's supposed to go where. And identifying those, the different transects and overlays.
Awesome. This is working again. Perfect. Thank you, Rosalind. Now to go to the audience again.
Hi, everybody. Similar to that gentleman, I just came back from Europe, and Ottawa needs to go a long way to be as efficient as many of the cities, namely Paris, Amsterdam, etc. The other thing that I've noticed about Ottawa, it's an American city for all intents and purposes. I spent about 3 years in Hartford, Connecticut, and it's much of the same. Everybody works downtown, come 5 o'clock, everybody goes home to their $1 million homes because they can't afford to stay downtown. So there you go with that scenario. And of course, the 15-minute walkable area, you go to Findlay Creek and there's nothing to walk to. You know, it's in the middle of nowhere. There's no public transit. So what do you do next?
So it is important to recognize that Ottawa is not as old as those European cities. So you're right, Ottawa has a long way to go because Ottawa has another couple of centuries to exist before it can measure up to that, right? And so that's one of the biggest challenges that Ottawa has. Like, we try and compare ourselves to something that we're just not there yet. Like, it's me trying to say, oh yeah, I'm going to deadlift 400 pounds. I haven't built up that strength to do that yet. Thank you. I appreciate the vote of confidence. And then the other thing is too, you got to look at the maturity that North America has gone through. It's very different. It was a society that's grown on with a pioneering kind of mentality, as opposed to, we'll take what we got. It's not come from the fiefdom kind of idea. It's come, here's the Wild West, go and carve out your piece of land and do that. And so that is a generational thinking that has existed in this ecosystem called North America, in Canada as well too, that people are not really willing to let go of. What is the biggest reason that people love coming to Canada? Because they have an opportunity to do something that they couldn't do in the countries that they were existing in before. And so to try and take away that opportunity and try and say, yo, you know what, you're going to live in these little boxes and you're going to be all compressed up against each other and you're going to enjoy it and you're going to walk to your stores because that's the way it was done in Europe 200 years ago, isn't necessarily a realistic vision for Canada either. And so we do have to keep in mind that there's another reason why people come to Canada, and we do have to provide that kind of housing for them as well too.
So thanks, Akash. And I want to ask just to hear a bit more from Sarah and maybe Rosalind before we wrap things up. I'll sort of put the question to you here too, and then we'll go to our next in-person question, and I'll leave that between Rosalind and Sarah to answer as well.
Which question?
Yeah. If you want to take a stab at this question, that was what I want to put to you.
Can you just repeat this question?
Oh, why is Ottawa not like Europe? Right. Okay. That's a very big question. So I'm not going to answer the question, but I would like to point out that much of the places that we really love in Europe were built without a zoning bylaw, right? They were built with just people making do and fitting people on their home onto their property as best they could. And it created a diversity and a lot of interest on their streets, narrow streets quite often, much more dynamic spaces. And so I think it's good to reflect on that once in a while and not get too carried away with all of these rules. Rules will not save us In fact, there are lots of instances where letting things kind of grow more naturally and allowing for the diversity and eccentricity of human life to unfold actually really pays off.
It is important to remember, though, that they do have a lot more built-in social housing in all of those communities we're talking about. They have dramatically more. So if we do go, we have to be careful how we get from here to there. So maybe one day.
Ottawa wants to spend $500 million to get downtown going.
To go to our next in-person question.
Thank you for all the presenters. It was a really good discussion. My question is on parking. So I'm really happy to see that the parking minimums are being removed from some areas of the city. I think it's good to have the developer or the person decide how much parking is required for that development. My first question is, how much money, like percentage of the unit, does parking increase the price of that unit? Underground versus surface. And my second question is generally on the zoning bylaw. Is there any provisions to have sort of an auto-updating zoning bylaw for specific residential areas? Let's say you reach the maximum height or the maximum unit amount in a certain area, like 30%, can it automatically go up to the next level? Just something to think about going ahead in the future, have an auto-updating sort of system to make it easier. Thank you so much.
I'll answer the parking type of question. So typically,
if I could actually ask,
Sure.
I was going to offer Adrian maybe an opportunity to speak on behalf of CADCO and sort of the nonprofit numbers.
Oh, well, we really try to avoid the underground parking one. So I'm going to pass it back to Akash for that, because we don't build them because
Whatever
they'd
works.
make it not work. Tens of thousands of dollars, absolutely. But it really depends. I mean, it depends on so many factors when it comes to any hard costs, especially anything that happens underground. We could look at a piece of ground and say, yeah, we can dig that up pretty straightforward. It depends on if we need a lot of shoring. It depends on a lot of different things. So, I mean, maybe a few examples, but honestly, we've done a really great job recently of not building underground parking. So I don't actually have any good current numbers, and we're very proud of that. So if you want to jump in with some hard cost numbers on underground parking, I think it'd be good. Surface is negligible.
I'd say we typically budget around $40,000 per stall for underground parking, give or take. And as far as what that constitutes for rent, you typically can charge around $200 per unit per month for a parking stall. So you can factor that in. So what often happens is that parking will be a separate thing. So a landlord may say, okay, here's what you pay for the unit, and then if you want parking, here's how much extra you pay for the parking. So.
However, I will add that on smaller infill lots, parking costs more like $100,000 a spot. Sometimes even more than that, because for every parking space you add, you lose built area. So it's not just the cost of a little bit of paving, it's the cost of that loss of what could have been someone's living room and dining room, or usually it's on multiple floor levels that you've lost that space. So very expensive. And culturally, we've kind of had an attitude that parking's free, so not free.
And I promise to keep this real brief. The most recent building that CCOC opened has, I think, 6 surface parking spaces, and we have cantilevered the building over them so that we could build more units, because it is not free, and we can do more with more housing if we can build more housing.
And then just to your second question about growing over time, our understanding of how we should zone, I think it's been challenging enough, I think, for the city to just put together our official plan for now and zone for that. So great thinking. You know, we should be thinking forward multiple steps. As we think about and wrestle with the challenges of change right now, we should have the courage to think many steps forward.
And what a hopeful note to end on for questions at the very least. So I think with that, we'll begin wrapping things up. Probably a good note sort of to also tack on here is we've seen a lot of technical questions sort of come in the chat, and probably to echo what councillors will say and what many sort of city staff might reply to many people here, is this is just the beginning of the zoning bylaw process. There's a lot more consultations to go. There's a lot more to happen between all our offices, and just sort of before handing it off to anyone who would like to close it up here, you can reach the new zoning bylaw team by writing them at newzoning@ottawa.ca. You can also check out the engage.ottawa.ca /zoning. It's also on the screen right now if you'd like to offer some comments and some thoughts. So I'll kind of leave that sort of piece of information for everyone that you'll probably hear repeated time and time again. I'd like to sort of pass the mic to Councillor Johnson, who I believe also has some things for our wonderful panelists.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to wrap up by saying thank you so much for everyone. I hope you're leaving with more questions than answers. I really do. Because if we had all the answers today, we wouldn't be doing this right. This has to be a slow process. Everyone has a stake in this, and so please get in touch with my office, with Jeff's office, with Catherine's office, with Wilson's office. Hey, bud. If you have any further questions. And I just wanted to say thank you again for these fabulous panelists on a July evening to come and just give us their impressions. And what I have as a token of our appreciation is a little sweetie from Big Joe's Convenience. So if you don't know Big Joe's Convenience in College Ward, it's a place at Greenbank and Baseline where you can get a Milano's pizza, a dessert made by a pastry chef, and a pack of smokes, all in the same place. And it is awesome. And so if you haven't been, for whatever reason you want to go there now after that advertisement, you should go, because it's a really unique spot. So I'll pass these out to you, but thank you again so much for your varied and diverse perspectives and what you've contributed to spark things off for people today. And big thank you to staff. All right. So we're all different. What?